Hi everyone, this is Zach Stevens. I did my final project posing the question whether or not Utah was pursuing economic gains at the expense of biodiversity. I focused on the negative externalities associated with human activity and how they were affecting the sagebrush and the sagebrush ecosystem, and specifically what prompted the choice of topic was the greater sage grouse. You can see that there. That's one of the males of the species. You see the weird sacs on its breast that it uses in its mating displays, but the greater sage grouse was the decision was just made not to list it under the Endangered Species Act back in September, and 11 western states, including Utah, opposed the listing under the Endangered Species Act, mainly due to the fact that they said it would harm their economies. And a lot of the economies out west rely on oil and gas exploration and extraction. Now, the major threats to the sage grouse are habitat loss and habitat fragmentation, and it's primarily due to human activity that these things are occurring. The bird population used to number in the tens, if not hundreds of millions, and it's now down to the probably hundreds of thousands. There's not a 100% accurate count, but it's showing a pretty steady about 1.5% decline per year. And like I said, so habitat fragmentation and habitat loss are the main causes of this, and that there wasn't really a strong regulatory environment in place to protect the bird. And that's why U.S. Fish and Wildlife thought a listing would probably be warranted back in 2010, but all these states have been developing their own sagebrush management plans in the time frame from 2010 to now, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife decided not to list the species. Like I said, I was focusing on the externalities associated with human activity primarily. And one of the best examples to see how this happens in Utah is with oil and gas extraction and fracking. So, when Utah was building its sage grouse management plan, it did a density study of the birds around the state. And it found that the lowest density of the birds within possible habitat was around oil and gas operations. So this isn't exactly surprising, but it gave Utah kind of the weight to focus on other areas where they didn't need to have any oil and gas activity for preserving the sage grouse. So for the oil and gas activity, it requires a lot of infrastructure, and this is where a lot of the negative externalities occur. A lot of this habitat loss, habitat fragmentation. Roads have to be built, pipelines in and out have to be built. There needs to be storage facilities on site for water and chemicals and gas and everything. And it also creates a lot of noise. And I have a picture here. This isn't Utah, but it kind of gives an idea. You can see how an operation spread out over an entire landscape really breaks up this habitat. And it's not just the sage grouse. I mean, other species that migrate through there, especially, land-based species like pronghorn antelope, deer, they also avoid these areas. They also show lower density in these areas. So it's not just habitat loss for the sage grouse, it's for everything that the sagebrush ecosystem helps support. And so Utah is focusing its efforts in these other habitat areas, but the negative externalities, associated with human activity, it's not just the oil and gas exploration. You also have a lot of population growth, recreation, hunting, grazing, and then another big contributor to loss of habitat is wildfire. And after a wildfire comes through, that's where the invasive species element comes in, especially something called cheatgrass. And I was talking with one of the policy experts for public land use in Utah who worked on this plan. And the use, cattle grazing, while potentially a threat if not done smartly, can also be a great benefit to sagebrush habitat and the sage grouse. So, what is a negative can be turned into a positive via letting the cattle graze on this invasive species. And essentially, it eliminates a lot of the competition for sagebrush when it's trying to reseed and, bring back some of that habitat. And so I think really what the state can't do is allow a lot of, something like oil and gas exploration, which also contributes, air quality, water use, and a lot of other things to grow and continue to eat away at the sage grouse habitat. Um, while at the same time, it doesn't have to lose economic growth. It doesn't have to lose income. It can actually expand something like the cattle industry using smart grazing techniques and using it following these wildfires. And the state has been experiencing wildfires every year for decades, for centuries. So really, you can see a lot of different agencies, a lot of different economic players coming together to save the species without really losing anything. And I think, the structure is there to really find a balance between economic gains and maintaining biodiversity in the state, which can really be a model to the other states as well. So we can limit those externalities for the sage grouse.